All right, so another episode of Once Upon a Boot. I have my guest here today, Caleb. He's the host of Caleb versus Self podcast. He's also a vet, so we got him on the show today. What's going on, man?
Not a whole lot. Just trying to grind through podcasts, just like you. Just trying to create some valuable content. At least I think it might be. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, people seem to be listening to both of us, so I mean, they're
Sometimes I don't know why, but hey,
yeah,
we
I
appreciate
kind of feel this. I feel the same way. It's like sometimes when I talk, I'm like, does anybody like? I know there's people that download the show, obviously, and you watch it. You're like, are they actually listening to it, or do they just download it just to be nice? Or so. I mean, as far as your podcast goes, and we'll get into more of it later. I want to talk a little bit about it now. Like,
Sure.
What made you get into that in the first place?
Well, after separating from the military, right, I do the thing that everyone does, and you try to find a job somewhere.
Yeah.
When I first got out, it was real hard, and it took a toll on me because, like, you get out and you're like, "Oh, I'm a veteran. Who wouldn't want to hire me?" And then you find out nobody cares. Nobody cares.
They talk up, and I say they. I'll just say like senior leadership in the military. Like they kind of build this idea in your head of like, hey, when you get out of the military, your skills are this valuable, and you'll be making X amount of dollars or whatever. They kind of build it up. Right? And then you get out and you're like, well, that's really not how it is. They kind of make it seem big, but then if you tell them that you're getting out actually, they just don't help you anymore. And then they're like, oh yeah, but you'll get out and you'll make however much money. This is how much money you need to make to live. And this is how much money you can expect. And it's never like that, right?
I had the opposite experience. The whole time I was in, everyone's like, you can't get out because you can't do shit. Like, you aren't worth anything. The only place you can stay is right here because this is the only place that will value you.
Yeah.
I remember on my second deployment getting into it with my command sergeant major for the battalion because he was making the pitch for everybody to re-enlist while we were deployed, right? You get the tax-free bonus and everybody, you get to choose your duty station and blah,
Which
blah,
feels
blah.
pretty nice at the time. You're like, oh, that tax-free money.
Well, here's the thing, though, is that, like, okay, here's this tax-free money, and while we're done, and now that we're done with this, I need you guys to go empty out the Connexes in the middle of 120-degree weather, and you're just like, why would I stay here? This sucks, you know?
Yeah. I always felt that same thing, and I always remember, like the chiefs on my boat, they'd be like, yeah, I got offered a job doing this, making like 80 grand a year to start, but I decided to stay in. It's like, well, when I get out, nobody was throwing $80,000 at me off the bat, so I think you're all full of shit.
The only group when I got out that was doing that was security contractors.
Well, yep.
Right? Do you want to go back to do the same stuff you were doing?
Yeah.
No, that's why I got out. But I remember particularly getting into it with this sergeant major, and at the time I was an NCO, and there's a bunch of lower enlisted and junior NCOs, I guess you would call them, right? E5s, E6s.
Yep. Sure.
And we're all sitting in this room, and he's making that pitch, and he's like, to make the amount of money you make right now, you would have to make like $35 an hour, or you would have to make 95 grand a year, some number like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, Sergeant Major, if I may, we're on a deployment where technically we work 24/7. So if I break down that number, you pay me like $1 an hour right now. So how do you factor that? And he's like, well, that's deployments. Like, that's part of being in the military. But you get free health care. And I said, Sergeant Major, if I may, if I go to sick call, you'll call me a malingerer. So I don't go to sick call.
Yeah.
And you just keep going down that list. And
it's such a good point.
He kicked me out.
Such a good fucking point.
He kicked me out of the meeting. He's like, Sergeant Dunham, get out.
Yeah.
Like, you're negatively influencing everybody around you. I was like, I'm just offering the different side of the story, Sergeant Major.
I would say healthcare in the military is only a positive if you have a family, because then they get to use whatever the fuck they want for free without, like you said, being called a malingerer or whatever. But I mean, even now, like, I've been out now for 3 years, and it's like, I mean, healthcare is really not, I mean, it's like, I mean, that will start to get like, political or whatever, but it's like, are we paying a lot for healthcare? Yeah. But it's also like, I'm not starving and living on the street and like everything that they said would happen if you got out, like, oh, you're going to be, working 3 jobs to make as much money and your family's going to be, and it's like, well, that's not really the case.
No, but there's also that like moment, like when you get out and you realize you can't find a job. Like the first place that called
Yeah.
me back was Home Depot for a part-time job, like getting carts in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, did I make the wrong choice? Like, did I just royally screw this up? Am I, in fact, not going to find a job? But eventually, I did. Long story short, I ended up in telecommunications. I work for a cable company now as a project manager. And to answer your original question about why I started the podcast, just like everybody else, everybody grinds to their 9 to 5. And with COVID, I'm in New York, and nobody was allowed to go see anybody pretty much. And you feel
I'm
very...
in Jersey right now. It's the same thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the tri-state area for New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, it tended to be super lockdown.
Very much so.
I felt very separated from everybody, and it got to the point where I was like, I just need to just talk to random people. So I reached out to a couple of old military buddies and talked to them for a little bit, and then I reached out to somebody that I work with who runs a podcast, and I was like, hey, I wouldn't mind jumping on and talking to you. And I realized that you can reach out to random people and talk to them, and most people will be like, nah, I'm not going to talk to this weird dude. I don't know you from anybody else. Why would I talk to you? But once you say, oh, I have a podcast and people listen to it, well, then it's completely normal, even though my goal is just to talk to different people just because.
I think it's really weird. Everybody that knows me well, like family, friends, whatever, I'm not a very social person. I don't usually either like people or going out and talking to people, but I talk to random people all the time on the podcast, and I have absolutely no problem doing it. And it's such a weird dynamic because in real life, if a stranger walks up to me, I want fucking nothing to do with them usually.
Yeah, I think for your podcast and for my podcast, you do a little bit of homework. It's not like you're walking into it with...
that's true.
Somebody that you don't completely know. I mean, you and I don't
Very
know
true.
each other, but we know each other as far as we're both former service members. We both got out, and we share a lot of parallel experiences, which makes that conversation easy.
That's very true. Very true. So let's get into a little bit about when you first joined. I always ask the question of everybody, what made you want to go to the military in the first place?
Because I knew I would fail out of college.
Huh.
I looked at college, everybody was applying. It was junior year going into sophomore year. Everyone's applying for school. I'm barely a C student at best. You know what I mean? School just wasn't my thing. I knew that if I went to college, I would just be flushing money down the toilet. So my options at that point were keep working at the restaurant you work at as a short order cook, which, hell no.
Yeah.
Go dump a ton of money that I don't have into college, or go join one of the branches. And when I put it that way, it's a pretty simple choice.
It's funny because you described everything that you shouldn't have done is everything that I did. And then at the end of college, I was like, I need to join the military because I have no fucking clue what I want to do. It's I barely scraped by high school. My girlfriend at the time, who's actually now my wife, she was like, you need to go to college. You're not going to join the military. And I was like, I mean, I barely graduated high school, so I couldn't go to a state school. I had to go to a private college because it was the only places you could get into without an SAT. Because I never took the SATs.
Me neither.
And I paid out the fucking ass for school. Yeah. And then at the end, I was like, I need to join the military to try to get these fucking loans taken care of. So it's I could have just bypassed all of that originally.
Well, I mean, if we're going full circle, yes, you did it the opposite way, but I joined the military, got out, barely, got through college at all, ended up working at Home Depot. So, I mean, it doesn't matter which way you go. I feel generally...
Yeah. You struggle both ways.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what choice you make. You're going to struggle,
Yeah. So, now, are you originally from New York?
Yeah, I'm from Rochester, New York, upstate New York area.
Okay.
Yeah. I've nothing
so
to add to
as far as recruiting goes, so I'm originally from South Shore, Mass, outside of Boston, and I know just joining the military there, it's a weird dynamic. It's everybody in Boston either ends up in the military, ends up in construction, or maybe you have a talent and you do something else. Mm-hmm. So it's when you go to reach out to a recruiter, it's kind of an odd process because it's not Texas or Florida where you see all these people joining the military. It's kind of few and far between. Was that kind of the same way in New York?
Yeah. So I was born in Rochester, and then 5th grade or so, we moved out to the suburbs, and everything changes at that point, right? All these kids are going to go to
Sure.
college, most likely. Their parents are, I don't want to say well off, but have enough to make it work.
They're comfortable.
Yes. Thank you.
They can get
Yep.
by. Yeah.
So, 90% of the school is going to go to college, and then you've got like another 9% of the school that either they have a job or they're in something that they already want to do. In upstate New York, we have a program called the BOCES program, where people can get into like auto mechanic school and like stuff like that.
Yeah, we have a lot of VOTEC schools where you same principle.
Yep. And then there's the 1% of people who are like, nah, I can't turn wrenches. I'm definitely not going to college. And then here comes the recruiter kind of skirting around those guys.
So did you flirt with kind of the different branches, or did you know right off the bat what you wanted to do? How did that kind of work out for you?
I went to the Marines so for us, we went and they gave people an opportunity to take the ASVAB, and most people who took it so that they didn't have to be in school. Like it was an opportunity to get 2 hours to not be in class. I took it, and right after that, I went to a Marine recruiter, only to find out that because of my GT score, there was no way I was getting into combat arms. And I was like, yeah, but if I wanted to do smart stuff, I would just go to college. I don't want to. I would rather be in infantry or in a scout or maybe a tanker. I don't know. I want to do something that's cool. And in the Marine Corps, at least my understanding is that once you're done with your basic training, they choose where you're going to go based on things like your physical ability, your scores from the ASVAB, things like that. So I was like, nah, I'll just go over to the Army guys because they'll give me whatever job I want. So I sat down with them, scrolled through the Rolodex, and watched the videos of all the
of course
making things look high speed, even though anyway.
Yeah.
I landed on Cavalry Scout. I thought that looked cool, and my recruiter was like, dude, are you sure? You can get a $40,000 bonus being a petroleum specialist. And I was like, pump gas? Dude, come on. I can do that here. Why would I pump gas somewhere else? So that's kind of how I never went Air Force or Marines or Navy or Coast Guard, I guess you would throw in there, but I never went to any of those.
Do you ever think back to when you first chose the job in the military that I should have gone to a specialty type rate, or are you happy that you went the way that you did?
I'm, believe it or not, happy I went the way that I did, and I think the reason why is that if I went to a specialty rate, which my brother did, he ended up in military intelligence. You end up being with, and I think we talked about this a little bit on my podcast. You end up being around people that you're going to be around anyway. If you're more of a smarter, and I'm going to use quotation marks because that's a broad stroke I'm making, but if have a high GT score or whatever, you're going to end up with other people who have really high GT scores. The thing about combat arms that I saw is that you have a pretty good, mix of different types of people, whether it's ethnicities, social backgrounds, religions even. There's a huge mix of people that you end up meeting, and quite honestly, some of the best friends that I have from my deployments and doing my time, I can tell you honestly that if I met them in the street before then, I wouldn't give them a second thought.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. I mean, that's kind of, I went more the technical route because I had already gone to college, and I was like, I kind of don't want to waste this, but it's funny when I first joined up and I got there, I remember I met a E6 at the time who was in charge of the barracks when you first get out of boot camp, and he was the same rate, but we call it rates, you guys call it MOSs. I don't know if it's the same in the Army, but let's say you picked the job that you picked. Are there also different subsets of that job in the Army?
So when you say subsets,
I say for us, so I was a fire controlman, which it's a very broad term. It's you're a fire controlman, but you can work on this weapon system or this weapon system or this weapon system or this weapon. There's so many different types of fire controlmans. So it's not you're in FC, you're going to do this exact job. There's so much shit that you could end up doing. So this E6 was I chose FC because it was a higher rated community, but I chose the quote unquote dumbest thing an FC can do. He's like, because I'm really smart, and now I stood out a bunch of all the idiots. And I was like, that seems like a little fucked up. And then later in my career, when I saw that genre of FC promoted so fast, I was like, fuck, maybe I picked the wrong thing.
So for you, you get to pick that subset. For us in the Army, once you pick your MOS, it's kind of your MOS. Once you get to your unit, they can do kind of whatever they want with you. Like, just because you're an infantryman or a scout doesn't mean you can't be in the headquarters platoon doing paperwork. Or, you know what I mean? Like,
so it's kind of, you get to the fleet, we'll say, and then they kind of just put you where they need to put you.
Yeah, and 90% of the time, you're going to be doing the role that you chose. But, you know, one of the things that everybody always, like, when you get to your unit, like, don't let anyone know you know how to use Excel. Because if you know that, your ass is going to be working for the CO because you know how to do macros in Excel. You know what I mean? It's like stuff like that.
Got it.
So,
see, that's weird because I guess maybe the Navy's unique in the fact that we just have like a designated like rate and job for every fucking thing, which is kind of like ridiculous because you meet somebody and you're like, oh, you're that rate? And they're like, yeah, but I work, like you said, in the office, but it's like that's their billeted job is for that, and they can't do anything.
Yeah, for us, it's slots. So you get X amount of slots per platoon, per company, battalion, so on and so forth. And those slots realistically,
got it.
For example, in a scout platoon, you're supposed to have, or at least in my scout platoon, we had 3 sections of 19 Deltas, which is Cav Scouts, and then 1 section of 11 Bravos who were supposed to be Bravo 4 qualified, so a sniper section. But those are just slots. Like, I can take a 19 Delta and stick them in there, or a 19 Kilo, or somebody, right? A body is a body as far as the Army is concerned.
Yeah.
And especially when you get into the NCO ranks, like, forget about it.
Yeah.
You're going to do whatever they tell you.
So, yeah, well, yeah. When you first join up, do you come from like a big military background, like in your family at all, or are you like the first of kind of everybody to do it, or?
It's a weird question, I should say. Both of my grandfathers served. They were both in the Air Force, but nobody ever, it wasn't like a...
It wasn't like tradition or anything like that.
It was out of necessity, right? So
Got
nobody
it.
ever really was like, oh, we do this, right? No.
Yeah.
I joined because those were the options in front of me, you know?
Of course. Yeah, and kind of the same thing for me. Now, when you joined, I know like when I first joined, I tried to find everything I could about like boot camp because I was so nervous about what boot camp was really going to be like. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be like Full Metal Jacket, or it's going to, be like this or that. Did you have any, I guess, preconceived notions of what it was like? And then when you got there, what were your actual thoughts of boot camp?
So for me, I joined my junior year going into my senior year, but I joined too late to actually do the separated program. So I'm sure you've heard of some people who they go to boot camp or basic training, whatever you want to call it, the summer going into their senior year of school.
So you're the second person that I've talked to that has done that, and it was both Army. So is that just an Army thing?
That was a surge thing, right? So at the time...
Okay. Just the time frame that
bodies.
You did, which is like 06, 07, right?
Yep.
Okay.
At that point, they needed bodies. I mean, I remember sitting in the recruiter's office looking at some kids and being like, that guy got in? Like, what the... You know what I mean? Like... As long as you had all your limbs, you weren't blind, and you didn't have AIDS pretty much, like, you could get in. There was a waiver for everything. And the other thing was, hey, look, if you want to sign a contract and we can hold you for, like, you do your senior year and then you come back, they'll sign you. They'll make it happen. Course. So I didn't go to basic training, though. So I was too late in signing to do that program. But what they did do is they called it the delayed entry program. So...
I was in
there you go.
As well.
So every week you had to, your recruiter had to reach out to you,
go to the recruiter's office,
keep track of you, and do all that, all that stuff. But with that, my recruiter spent a lot of time with me, being like, "Here's what to expect. Here's what you're gonna do." He would put us through PT. He would kind of let us know.
So you had a good recruiter, is what you're saying.
A rare recruiter, a rare one.
I was gonna say my recruiter, great guy, horrible fucking recruiter, did not prepare me. I was in the delayed entry program for 9 months, and he did not one fucking time prepare me for anything I was going to see in boot camp. So much so that when I got there to the airport in Great Lakes, everybody in the airport had a pamphlet of like the sailor's creed, your general orders. Here's the different, general knowledge type question, like everything to know. I was like, where'd you guys get this pamphlet? They're like, your recruiter didn't send you with this pamphlet? I was like, no. I didn't even fucking know. Everybody was like dressed nice. I was in like sweatpants and a t-shirt. Like nobody fucking smartened me up about anything.
That's hilarious. I had the opposite, complete opposite thing. And my dad was into it. Like my dad was like, yeah, do whatever you got to do with them. So there was one morning, it was a Saturday morning, we were supposed to do like PT. And I was supposed to be at the recruiter's office. I slept in. I wasn't going there. And my recruiter showed up to my parents' house. And my dad was like, oh, do you want him? Yeah, he's sleeping. Do whatever. Go for it. And my recruiter walked in and literally grabbed the mattress of my bed and flipped it clean over. And that was before I even got to basic training. Like, he was messing with me.
So you were ready to go.
It was shout out to him. I don't know where he is, but Sergeant Roxburgh, he was a good recruiter. He was a good dude. He definitely set me up for success long term, for sure.
Did you ever have the moment while you were in boot camp, like, why the fuck did I do this? Because I had that moment.
So you get off the bus, you get to reception. First of all, nobody prepares you for reception. Reception sucks.
Getting off the bus and they're just instantly screaming at you and you're moving like 1,000 miles a minute.
So there was a holdover between classes. So I was in reception for like an extra week. And the only way they could punish you was overhead arm clappers.
Oh, we call it P days in Navy boot camp. It's processing days. So it's like you're not fit for full duty yet, so they can't technically like PT you. So they can only do weird punishments. They used to. I'll never fucking forget this. We have this book called the Blue Jackets Manual, and it was like standards and practices of the military. And they would make us open it up to page 100, and there was a paragraph that was the definition of the word discipline. And we had to hold the corners of the book with our fingers like out like this. And we had to read in unison the paragraph about discipline, which like, how the fuck do you get 80 people together to read a paragraph, like without fucking up? So, like we never made it past the second sentence ever. It was just like over and over and over. Or they make you hold your dog tags and they make you dangle them like right above your hand. And they're like, you can't let the dog tags bend. They have to say straight up, which like after a minute, your arm weighs like, 100 pounds. And you're like, this is fucking miserable.
So there was that. And then I remember it was the second night at reception, going back to my bunk, falling asleep. And then, you wake up whenever and you got to piss in the middle of the night. So you go to the latrine.
Of course.
And in the latrine, I remember walking in and seeing these two dudes drinking the hand sanitizer out of the, when you go to wash your hands, there's hand sanitizer in there. And they were drinking it. And that's when I realized as I was walking back to my bunk, like probably a quarter of the people that were in there in reception with me were literally detoxing in their bunks from whatever, whether it's alcohol or meth. I don't know what the hell they did, but they were just detoxing. I remember in that moment being like, I'm 17 years old, realizing that most of the people around me are like 25, 26.
Yeah.
What? Like, what? At what point did you like screw up everything so bad that you're detoxing in reception trying to go to basic training? That was my.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Whenever I saw like, there's always like that 30-something-year-old guy that's like either in your boot camp division or maybe it's in like another one. And you're like, how did he end up here? Like what happened that, this guy's 30 and has to
and
join?
then you get to basic training and you do your first like 2 weeks. For in the Army, there's phases. So there's like red phase, white phase, blue phase, so on and so forth. So you're like in white phase. So you have like half an hour to talk to the, people in your platoon, let's say. And I start talking to him, and I start realizing, like, okay, that guy's a former felon. That guy's a drug addict. That guy's got, like, 4 kids. I'm 17 years old. I feel completely out of place. And those are part of, like, those oh shit moments. Like, did I screw up?
Yeah. And it's such a crazy feeling, too, because, I mean, in all reality, you're all equal at that point. But everybody's at such different, life moments. and you're like, this is so weird. I always felt weird. I joined when I was 21, but it's kind of the same thing. I'm like, I'm at the same level as this like 17, 18-year-old kid, but we're also on the same level as the 30-year-old guy that's got a couple kids. So it's like, it's such a weird dynamic. And then we're being yelled at by somebody who's like 23. Like, they're really not that much older than me, and they're screaming in my face. So it's, boot camp's wild. It's such a weird
realizing that
place.
my drill sergeant was 23 and had already done 3 tours in Iraq and like had seen some heavy stuff already.
Yeah.
He's screaming at this 40-year-old dude who can barely do a push-up was like,
yeah.
this is like Willy Wonka's factory. Like, you're gonna see all sorts of weird shit through this whole thing. Did you guys have any people who tried to run away?
We didn't have anybody that tried to run away in my division. I want to say in like the barracks that, you know, our division was in. I think somebody did. We did have a lot of people that left our division. I think we lost like 10 people during boot camp. Like, one of them, I remember I got really scared because he had a phobia of needles.
Okay.
And I also am terrified of needles. But he like explicitly was like, no, I don't want to get shots. I'm scared of needles. So he got separated because he wouldn't get his like immunizations in boot camp. And I was terrified because I was like, I am also really scared of needles, but I don't want to get sent home. And then we had a lot of people leave during the moment of truth.
What's
like just never saw them again. Did you guys do the moment of truth in boot camp? So I think it might just be a Navy Marine Corps thing because I've heard Marines do it as well. They basically, you get to boot camp. I want to say it's like during the first week. They bring you into a room and they say, all right, this is everybody's, you know, you have complete immunity. You can come clean for anything that you didn't disclose to the recruiter before joining, and you'll receive no punishment for it. And then you'll see people like go forward and be like, yeah, you know, I smoked weed. And then it's like, okay, they're gone. Like, you have all these people come forward. They say you have immunity, but you don't. They're setting you up. What they actually do, they plant people that either work at like boot camp, or maybe they're like recently graduated and they're on hold. They'll put them in the like audience with the rest of the people in boot camp. And then they'll fake come forward with things to kind of make it seem like everybody else should. And then they just start weeding people out.
This was the opposite.
Yeah.
For us, it was don't tell me because you need to stay in. Like, we need bodies.
Which is what my recruiter told me. He's like, don't disclose a fucking thing to them. And then you get to boot camp and they're like, no, come on. Just tell us whatever. And then it's just like, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. So we lost like 10 people that day.
Out. In fact, we had 2 kids like run away, try to go AWOL essentially in the middle of basic training. They caught him on the outskirts of post, brought him back, and you would think like, okay, these are the fuck-ups that you want to get rid of and get them out of your army. No. Sure. We're going to bring you back, and you're going to get recycled to the next group for basic training. You're going to do this shit all over again.
I never understood. It's like, if you're trying to leave during basic training, which when you look at basic training, I don't know about you, but you see some people in the military, when you first join, you're like, all right, if that dude made it out, right, I'll be fucking fine. So you're like, if you're running away during basic training, like, what are you going to do when, you know, shit hits the fan and you're overseas? It's like, you might want to get those fucking people out.
Again,
you know?
This was during the surge for us, so nobody was getting out. You were not getting away.
Yeah.
They made sure they would. The only thing that they would do that I remember is they would say, listen, on your paperwork you signed that you're doing this of your own free will, correct? And people were like, no, I didn't say that. And they're like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah, no, I didn't. And they're like, okay, well, you're still not going anywhere, so are you sure? And they're like, yeah, I guess I did. And they're like, all right, good, keep going. There was no getting out of it.
So when you do finally make it out of boot camp and you get to your first duty state, well, you guys Army goes to like another school. It's like combat school.
So there's different MOSs.
Right?
If you have a combat MOS, you do something called OSET training, which is one station unit training.
OSET.
So you get like one weekend. They call it a weekend, but it's like half a day where you get to see your family like on post, and then you go right back into it. So for us, basic training would go like red phase, white phase, blue phase. Then you would get that like weekend. And then you would go into black phase and gold phase, which is your combat training portion. If you are not combat arms, you would get your, your week off or whatever you would get, and then you would report to your next station. So for some people, you do basic training at like Benning, let's say, and then you would go to Huachuca for, military intelligence, or you would end up at Fort Gordon for commo, or whatever it is. So
Got it. So when you get out, you start going to this. Do you have this sense of like I don't even know how to describe the feeling, but I think we all kind of have it. You get out of boot camp, and then you just think that you're like the coolest fucking person on the planet because you're like, I'm a soldier, or I'm a sailor now, or I'm a Marine, or whatever it is. Did you have that like big head
yeah,
after you
it
got
was
out
like
of boot camp?
Pinocchio. I'm a real soldier now. Like
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
know. You have no idea, but you're walking around,
Yeah.
and then you realize, like, oh, I don't have a unit patch on my arm. Like, I look like an idiot. Everyone goes through that.
Did you recognize though that you looked like an idiot when you got out? Because there's a lot of people that don't, and I'm like, you do realize that you're still wearing your PT shoes from boot camp with your web belt and your fucking Eisenhower jacket.
The funnier part for me, I didn't initially. I won't lie to you. Initially, I did not have that level of self-awareness, and I remember going back.
Got it.
So I had to do the hometown recruiter program, so I got to stay home for a little bit longer to help recruiters pull. It was terrible,
that's nice.
But
Oh, I didn't get
again,
that option.
for me, it was during the surge.
I remember,
and I feel like if you join
yeah.
during the surge, your experience of basic training and recruiting is completely different.
That's what I've noticed.
Yeah,
That's what I've noticed from talking to people.
Dude,
for sure.
They were getting anybody who was anybody to do it. Like, they didn't care. But I remember coming back and wearing like my basic training hoodie that I had.
Of course.
And you walk into the recruiting station, they're like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? And I'm just like, oh, what? And that's when you kind of get told, like, bro, you're still nobody. You realize that, right?
When my buddy came back from the Marines, from boot camp, this is before I joined. I was still in college, I think, at the time. He had just come back from boot camp, and he had on like the Marine Corps, like that tracksuit that they get in boot camp. I don't know what it's called. And I was like, that's so fucking cool. But then after I joined the Navy, I was like, what a fucking loser he was. Like, because I was never like, I'm going to wear my PT uniform out in public kind of guy. Like, I kind of recognized that, but I did have like the Under Armour Navy shirt and like, just like the Hooyah Navy type stuff. But I didn't wear like uniform items. So I was just like a different type of loser.
I think everybody goes through that loser phase, right? Whether it's you're walking around in your, well, for me it was ACUs, it might have been BDUs, or I don't know what the uniforms are now, but so you might be wearing your uniform walking around town, or you might be wearing your unit shirt that you got from the crappy store on from the PX. It says your unit name or whatever. You might be the kid that went and got a tattoo. Good. Like, there's different forms of all of those different things, man.
There were a lot of people that got their rate or MOS symbol like tattooed on them like the weekend getting out of boot camp. And I'm like, you guys have been that, like, you're technically in the Navy, you're technically not even rated until you go to the school for that. So I was like, you guys are getting this symbol and you guys haven't even started school. Like, what if you don't fucking pass school?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I've got cross sabers on my back.
Just like,
I was one of those kids, man. I didn't go full, like all the way in, but I definitely have the cross sabers on my back. So it's the tattoo I regret.
I mean, I have some nautical tattoos. Like, I'm not gonna lie about that. But I also like just some of the people. It's a tradition in the Navy. If you're a boatswain's mate, which is like one of the rates, you'll see people, they get the crossed anchors on their hand, like right in the corner right here. And there were people getting that, and they're not even either that rate at all, or they weren't even like in the fleet. I was like, you're gonna get to a ship, and I have a really fucking strong feeling they're gonna make fun of you as soon as you fucking get there.
Yeah. I mean, there's just like with everything, there's different levels to it. I think, and I could be wrong, but it seems like in the Navy there are some specific like tattoos and things that you get. Like when isn't there one where you cross like hemispheres or something? You get like some kind of thing.
Yeah. There's like if you're a shellback, or there's different terms for different things. Like I got the pig and the rooster on my feet, which is like the traditional thing. But that's like the only, I guess, like super Navy thing that I got tattooed on me. But I feel like everybody either gets the tattoo, buys the clothes. There's some people that go and get like the crazy interest rate car.
I did it, buddy. I got. No,
you did it?
No,
was it a Mustang?
No, it was worse.
Oh,
it was so terrible, dude.
Because that would have. It's
Dude,
worse. Worse than a Mustang. Camaro,
Nope.
Dodge Challenger. Those are like the three. It's like Mustang, Challenger,
Ford Escape,
Camaro. So
it was
a
sensible,
sensible
you know.
car.
I paid it off, but
so what was the crazy interest rate
18%.
you got when you bought it?
18%. Yep.
Fuck me.
Yep. And at that point, like I don't know how you are, but I didn't come from a family of money. Like I had no concept of finances.
No.
I had no fucking idea.
Dude, we had no money. When I saw people out of boot camp that were getting like the fucking like essentially race cars, and they were like, yeah, it was only this % interest rate. Like I knew when they said the number, I was like, that's a big number. I'm pretty sure that's not good. But also I was like, how the fuck are they affording this? Like we're making the same amount of money and I have no money. I don't understand like how that's even happening. Like we had a kid who bought like, I forget what year they brought like the GTO back. Pontiac had like the GTO again. He bought like a fucking jazz blue GTO and bought like everything for it. It had like a ridiculous interest rate. And then I also remember he went to the strip club like every weekend because he was in love with the stripper. So he was spending all of his money on this car and strippers. And I was just like, I didn't understand how he had that much money to spend. I was like, is he dealing drugs on the side? Because I'm an E3. I don't have that type of money right now.
I think ultimately the thing that saves me on that car is that I bought it and I had it for almost 11 years before it finally, like it took too much. It was more to fix it than it was value-wise, so I ended up scrapping it. But
yeah, I mean, Ford Escape's not a crazy purchase. When you first said Ford, I was like, tell me you didn't get like a lifted like F-250 because you see a lot of those car
because I thought I was being smart. You know.
Well, now you get to be like the carpool guy when everybody goes on Liberty.
I
together.
did a lot of those. I did make. So for me, I made quite a bit of money back driving people around. This is before Uber. Like Uber wasn't a fucking thing. We were barracks rats.
No, we had
and
taxis.
if you had $10, I would drive you to the mall.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I would do that. So
you got to make money where you can, man. I used to sell condiments on deployment on the ship when we ran out. I'll give you a squirt of ketchup for $1.
That's hilarious, dude.
So, I mean, hey, you gotta get it in. There were people that bought they would buy all the energy drinks in the ship store whenever we got a shipment underway. And then you go into the store to get like a Monster or Rip It or whatever the fuck it was. You'd be like, "Do you guys have none left?" And they'd be like, "Oh, go see you know, this guy in supply." And you go down there, he'd have the whole fucking case. And he's like, "Oh, sell it to you for $6." It's like, dude, what the fuck? I mean, I gotta stay awake. I need the Monster, but you know. So, when you get done with that, how long are you in the Army before you
Almost
get deployed
a year
for the first time?
So at that point, the Army, although we were in the middle of a surge, they had enough foresight to send like 98% of us to a unit that was just coming back from deployment. So you had a window of 9 to 12 months for train up and for all the things that you would need to do to deploy properly.
And talk to the people that just got back and get perspective
Which you don't
on
get
what's
very
going
much.
on and all
Like,
that stuff.
they come back and they were just fucked in the head.
Yeah.
Like I still love those guys to this day, but like coming back, especially as like a fresh, you know, a brand new dude who again knows nothing. Like you show up to your unit and that was the first time you put on your unit patch and you were super like proud of it, and then you get to your unit and they're like, you haven't done shit. Don't talk to me. Shut up. You know what I mean? Like but the insight that you get is it was craziness for me. I remember, and I told this story to my buddy a couple of weeks ago. I remember going drinking. I was 18 and waking up in the back of a car with a bunch of the two E6s, a couple of E4s, and one E5 that I didn't know from anything else. Like earlier today, they were screaming at me, making me do push-ups and qualifying and doing all that stuff. All of a sudden, I'm drunk as hell, and I'm in the back of this
Yeah.
car, and we're driving down this Texas country road to the next club that apparently I was with them the whole time. And they take out freaking handguns and start, blasting them in the side of the field, just shooting guns. I'm 18 years old. I'm drunk. I have no idea where I am, and I'm with a bunch of dudes just shooting guns out of a car. I was scared shitless.
That sounds very, very much like
I don't know.
Texas-y.
It was scary as hell.
Like when I think of Texas, I'm just like, yeah, shooting guns out the side of a truck.
Like it was an
into a field.
empty
Like,
like when you look
what I
closer, you're like,
imagine
okay, it's not
Texas
like people
is
or
like.
anything, but it's still in that moment. I was like, I'm going to jail. There's no
That's
question
still-
about it.
That never would have happened in my training in fucking Great Lakes, Illinois. Like no one's driving around shooting. If there's shooting guns in
Well,
like
and
near
that was
Chicago,
my
you're
first
dying.
insight
so
to really how
not really fields.
PTSD and how severe some of these guys come back to damage. Like their thought process is completely changed. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it and you've seen it, but like we used to have a gate out in front of Fort Hood, and it was days since last traffic fatality. And for the first year I was stationed at Fort Hood, it never went above 2 days. Ever. Never.
Wow.
So one of the things that happens, or at least that I saw
That's crazy.
with PTSD or with dealing with that trauma, is that when they come back, risk isn't real anymore. I can drive my Busa at 200 miles an hour down the side of a country road because I survived war. Like, I can't be killed. And you have all these guys that start taking the most, like, ridiculous risks with their own life when they're back stateside and in country because, again, they've survived things that you can't even imagine, so they feel invincible. And so many people died that way doing stuff like that. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's and I would assume, at least at the time that it was, like nobody was really talking about PTSD or anything like that at that time.
Yep.
They're just like, come back, go right back over.
You're gonna go home. You're gonna have about $80K saved up or $40K, whatever you ended up saving from your deployment, tax free. Most of these guys are single dudes or recently divorced. The first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna buy the coolest fucking thing they can think of, the fastest thing they can think of. They're gonna do all the drugs, find all the strippers. They're gonna do all the things because again, you're invincible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you think about it in terms of, like, let's say you have a wound, it's like, hey, I have this really deep gash. Should I change this bandage? Like, nah, just keep it on.
Well, I think for these guys,
We'll
using that same analogy, they would pick at it. They would keep ripping the scabs off.
Yeah. Is it supposed to still bleed? Is that supposed to happen? They're like, yeah, no. You know what? Let's change the bandage. Well, shouldn't we stitch it? No. Just,
you got a hot glue
put
gun?
another
I'll
patch
just
over it. It's like that's
glue it,
Yeah, it's like, well, if you cut it more, it'll bleed more.
That
it's
means
like,
more white blood cells, right?
Yeah,
That's what
so
that
just do
means
that.
when I do that?
Yeah. More means you're winning. So, you're with this division of guys who's, disgruntled. They're a little, fucked up from just coming back over. Are you excited to go there? Are you nervous? Are you... Like, what's your thought before you go over?
I felt a lot more comfortable as time went on during our training. So for us, the unit that I went to was 3/8 Cav out of Fort Hood. And when we first got there, 3rd Brigade has obviously several battalions beneath it. There was one battalion which was all Cavalry Scouts. That was 6/9 Cav. Well, technically it's a squadron, but either way. They sent everybody to 3/8 Cav, which was a heavy combat brigade. So you had a headquarters company, you had 2 infantry companies, 2 tanker companies, and like an engineer company. So it was a mixed bag of people. What they would do is they would send, and there was probably like 50 or 60 brand new scouts that went to one platoon. And what they did is every week they would just cut people, and you would get sent to this squadron, and you were treated like, a shitbag. So if you didn't have a good PT score, if you didn't qualify at the range properly, it was like basic training all over again, except you had your weekends back. And their whole concept was, we're going to weed out all the garbage, send them over to the squadron because screw them.
Yep.
So by the time we went through that whole process to deployment, like all the guys that were there they were the smartest, they were the strongest, they were the most, ready to go for that particular platoon. So by the time we got to the deployment, I guess comfortable, but still somewhat nervous,
Yeah. So when you get over there for the first time, now did you go to
I
Iraq
went to
or
Iraq both times. The
Afghanistan? Where
first
did you end up
deployment in
going?
2009 was Mosul, Iraq. So that was the last push of the counterinsurgency. So if you look at Iraq from bottom to top, if you look at, from the invasion, so we invaded from the south and from the west to get all the way to Baghdad. And then from Baghdad, from 2003 until 2009, essentially, you slowly pushed the bad guys farther and farther and farther north until the thought is you push them out of the country. So we got to Mosul, which is the largest city at the more northern point of the country, and as that last push to get the bad guys out. That was my first deployment. My second deployment was the train and assist, if you will. We would train and assist the Iraqi IP, the police, and the army, and that was in Basra. Yep. And I spent a good chunk of that right on the border of Iran, just watching watermelon trucks come from Iran to Iraq, from Iraq to Iran, and we'd have to scan the watermelon trucks with these essentially CT scanners to see if there was anything hidden inside the watermelon, and those were essentially my two deployments.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is once we pushed all those bad guys out of the country, we ended the war and everybody came home. And
I was there. So my second tour was the last combat brigades and battalions were coming out of Iraq. I was part of the last group that officially left Iraq, and the war was over. And I'm going to use so many quotation marks throughout the rest of this, but
yeah,
we sure are,
because we're still dealing with the same thing now. So when you first get over there, I've had a lot of people that were boots on the ground in, the Middle East areas saying like it looks almost like a completely different like world, just like the terrain, how everybody lives. Like, I went to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain. They're more, cities, big flourish. Like I was never out like in the deserts or in the mountains or anything like that. So, when you first get over there, is it wild to you? Is it what you expected it to be like? I don't
want to give the Army too much credit, but they did a pretty good job at like kind of setting you up for what it was going to look like, what it was going to sound like to some degree. Like you get glancing blows of Arabic, and we get sent to Fort Irwin,
sure,
out in California for training, which is, I guess about as close as you're going to get to those type of conditions.
Like that mountainous.
So they've got mountainous landscapes, and I think it's right near Death Valley. So you also have like the desert type landscapes there as well. So they did a pretty good job setting you up for that. What they don't set you up well for is the smell. When you first get to a country, a third world country like that, especially one that, if we're being honest, was completely war torn for almost a decade at that point. Open sewers in the streets,
sure.
The landfills,
Absolutely.
like just all the garbage, and that was probably the shocker of anything else, was just the smell.
Smell in general, I think the one thing, as vets or as service members, whatever, take away, I can still smell so many smells. Like when I think back, it's like, when you're on a ship and you share a berthing with 80 other guys with, 3 toilets and 2 urinals and 3 showers, it's like I can still smell that
From
smell.
My first tour, in my head, it's always cut in half. So the first half of the tour, we were inside of Mosul, operating within the city. The second half of the tour, we were at this cop all the way out in the middle of nowhere called Talabta. And there was probably the worst living conditions I've ever had. Your stereotypical poop in the 55-gallon bucket. Somebody's got to go burn it. We had these PVC pipes that were buried into the ground like 10 feet, and then it would come out like 4 feet. And that's where you would piss. And getting to that point, all right,
nice.
After 2 days, mind you, it's cooking. All that piss is in the earth right there cooking. And the only way for the scent to get out is through that PVC pipe. So when you would stand there and pee in it, it would come right up you, and it would go right in your nostrils, and it was the worst ammonia smell I've ever.
Oh, it's like, so the plumbing on the ship is all, it's called VCHT. It's like, I forget now what it fucking stands for, but it's like, it's a vacuum tube essentially. So it's like, you're pissing and shitting into a pipe that goes into a tank that sits like right below where you're living. And it's just like once that gets backed up and you have 80 fucking people's, piss and shit, and it's like you said, it's like there were times underway where it would back up so much that they have to secure it on the ship so now nobody can go. And I always said, like, the one thing that I'm envious of people that were ever outside in the military is, like, worst case scenario, you could piss in the grass or the sand or whatever. It's like, if they won't let me pee, it's like I can't
They
just
don't
like
let you,
piss on
into
the
the
floor
ocean
of the ship. No, like you're just like they're like, all right, the heads are secured, and you're like, okay, so what do I do when I have to shit?
Oh man,
Hold it until they're not secure, and then you'd go into the head after they've been secured. So it's a vacuum tube, right? So when they secure it, the vacuum no longer functions, so everything goes back up. So a ship rocks. So you go into the head after they're done being secured, and there is shit and piss sloshing back and forth on the ground, and you're just like, like now I gotta fucking take my boots off after. I gotta wash my boots because they're covered in piss and shit. It's just like it's fucking miserable. I hate just the smell. Just
the
like
other
lingers in my head.
the story I'll tell you before we move on there though is at Cop to Lopta. The other thing we had is we had to build our own outhouses. Finally, they were like, all right, you don't have to shit in the buckets anymore. Like they gave us these nets, so they gave you a plastic toilet seat that had a net in it. And they gave you a whole box of these things that we called wag bags.
Nice.
So you open it up. There's a little thing of toilet paper in there, and there's essentially like a Ziploc bag. So you put it into the net, and then you can put the seat down and take a shit in it. And then when you're done, you wipe, you handle your business, you put it in the bag, and then you tie the bag up and you throw it into the burn pit. And that's how you went to take a shit. Well, we had some colonel or 2-star general or somebody wanted to come, do an inspection. You remember those.
Naturally. Yep. Like make sure the sand is spotless, guys.
Somebody from the personal security detachment of that higher up went into the outhouse and just took a shit in the net and left it there. And we're all just like, dude, what kind of come on. Are you kidding me? Like you just come in here, you come hang out, you come tell us that we're doing a horrible job, and then you shit in our nets and leave. Fuck, dude.
Yeah. Assholes. Dude, any type of inspection, and you ever get the inspections when you were in, and you're like, did they actually say we need to do this? Or has it just snowballed so much that this is what it is?
Right. CO says to be here at 5.
Yeah.
Platoon leader says... yeah.
So we need to be here at 1 in the morning, and... Yeah, there was a funny meme somebody posted on Facebook. It was like the CO, it's like the CO on the ship walked by a space and looked and kept walking, and the department head saw him look, so he went to the division officer and said, "Hey, make sure this space is clean." Then the division officer goes to chief and he says, "Hey, the CO's gonna come inspect this space," and then the chief goes to everybody else and he's like, "We're field daying the engine room," and it's like, what?
Yeah. Well, everyone's
so, like,
afraid
that's how
of
that
getting
shit
chewed
happens.
out, and nobody wants to use
wild.
any sort of reasoning and common sense. And the reason why, I think, is because at the end of the day, there's always a junior enlisted that will fuck it up for you. Always.
Yep. And there's always a junior enlisted who will just do whatever the fuck you say, like a zombie, and like there's just, So it is what it is. But so while you're deployed, right, going out on missions and patrols and combat type stuff, it's a small part of what a deployment is, right? The other part is sitting around doing nothing, being beyond, bored out of your fucking mind, right? What were some things that you did while you were deployed that kind of like were your go-to things to keep busy?
Everybody worked out. I mean,
absolutely
that's always a natural. Yeah, that's for sure.
That's a given.
Chess was a big part for us. Yeah.
Chess.
I don't know why we all sucked at it. It's not like anyone was fucking good, but it was something that like would occupy your mind long enough to be like, oh, I'm not in my deployment right now. But it was short enough to where when shit had to happen, like you can go and do what you got to do. I think the other things that we would always do is everybody would make up games and play jokes and pranks on each other. Somebody...
Of course. Did you guys have like the hard drive that got passed
Dude,
around
everybody
that had
that.
all the
No,
movies and TV
yeah,
shows on it?
That was
or
there.
Was
the
this too
difference
early?
was the hard drives weren't as
okay.
big as they are now. It wasn't like a terabyte.
Of course, no. It was like
Yeah,
it was like
if you had one of
500
those
gigs
floating
was,
around,
like,
people were
the
like, "Oh
biggest
shit, you got
thing
everything."
you could find. Yeah. I still have my hard drive for my deployments, and it doesn't work anymore. But I just can't get rid of it because I'm just like, there is gold on
the
that
other
fucking
thing, depending
thing if
on
I can
what
ever get it to work.
fob or cop or whatever you were at, is there was always the the rip-off movies, we'll call them. There's different terms for them, as you know, but there's always a local that can sell you some stuff here and there. Fake G-Shocks, movies that haven't come out yet.
Yep.
Yes.
We had a kid bought a fake Rolex. He's like, I found a Rolex for $50. I was like, yeah.
I bought a
it's
G-Shock
not
for
a
$10.
Like the next week, the hands were
I
like
bought a
floating
G-Shock.
in
It
the
actually
case.
lasted me the rest of that deployment, but yeah, it's all fake stuff, but you would always get, crappy movies from there.
Yeah.
Games were a big thing. If somebody was fortunate enough to have a football, you might play football until somebody got hurt, and then the company commander found out, and then there was no one's allowed to play sports anymore.
Of course.
I'm trying to think if there's anything like in particular. Pranks were a big thing for us, man. I mean,
yeah, pranks. There's like the little pranks, and then there's like the big pranks that get everybody in trouble because somebody higher up finds out about it.
So we had one
kind of
where,
exposes the whole operation.
An old buddy of mine who he would go into the shower trailer, and he would leave all of his stuff on the bench right next to the door, including his towel. Like everything, for whatever reason, he left it on the bench instead of hanging the towel like right next to the shower curtain so that when you're done you could like grab it. He would always leave it over there. So we would just take it, all of it.
Okay.
And leave him ass naked, sopping wet, trying to run back to his chew. And it's, you've got your shower shoes on, but you know as well as I do, like the sand is going to get kicked up on the back of your calves. And it's, that got hard stopped one time because he was running around buck naked and there was a female NCO that happened to see. So we all got tore up pretty good for that one.
Oh, no.
Just stuff like that,
That's no good. Yeah, prank. You look back on some of the pranks, at least I do, of, that you did to people and how funny. Everybody kind of got a good laugh out of it. Even the people that got pranked, eventually they look back on it. It's like, we could never even attempt that in the civilian world.
You might go to jail.
Dude, oh my God. Could you imagine, with... Dude, well, I was thinking, me and my buddies were talking about this. Could you imagine, like with the cancel culture, whatever you want to call it now, like if they had found out about some of the things that people in the military do to one another, like for fun, it was it would be wild. Absolutely wild. I mean, just like even the little things. I remember we Facebook stalked like our chief, and we found pictures of him that were like really embarrassing, and we just like posted them up throughout the ship. And like everybody would like laugh at him when he walked out. It took him forever to realize that we were doing it. And, little things like that. You steal people's cat cards, and then we had like the grease pencils on the ship, so we'd like fuck up their IDs with grease pencils, and then we tape over it so like they.
Yeah, those are like the silly things that you would always do. I think the other thing that always comes to mind, and I'm guessing you probably have this as well, is when you do like a watch. So for us, we called it guard. You probably called it watch or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's always you and one dude.
We call it watch.
And the conversations that you end up having when it pushes 2, 3, 4 in the morning are the weirdest.
Yes. That was my initial idea for a podcast. I was like, I want to do, like, I didn't know what to call it, but I was like, I want to essentially have watch conversations with people. And I was explaining it to one of my buddies. He's like, that's a great idea. But he's like, I don't think anybody would fucking care to listen to it. And I was like, I think it would just be, it's like, how do you market? First of all, how do you get to you can't just like start a conversation off like, hey, if you could fuck a planet, like what planet would you like, like you end up on the weirdest type shit, like where you're debating like the galaxy's existence. And you're like, how, like you can only reach that at 2:00 in the morning when you've been there for 5 hours and your relief still hasn't come. And you're like, I guess we'll start talking about how do they make curtains.
I remember pulling
and
guard
then
one
you're
time
like
with,
delving
with a
into like
buddy of mine,
ridiculous
and
shit.
we would do. It sounds dumb, but we would do our own radio show. We would be sitting in an MRAP pulling gate guard, and you have to use the truck as the gate because there's just a bunch of berms. You didn't have anything else, so you'd be sitting there with your headset on in the MRAP with the radio on, so you could communicate with each other just like we are on a podcast right now. We've got microphones and headsets and doing all that. It was the same setup, and we would literally sit there and be like,
sure.
Next on WGR, just completely making up your own radio station, acting like you're back, stateside. And by the time you're done with it, you forgot everything that you said, but it was good shit.
Did you guys have the we called it a deck log? Did you guys have like the log of all the watches prior where they would report like anything that happened? I remember reading through the log. I would get bored. I'd read through the old logs, and you'd always know like when somebody was really fucking bored on watch because you'd look back at some of the we had one. This guy had like 12 lines of reporting on like this fucking pigeon on the pier. He's like unidentified object reported on the pier, and it was like the next line was like pigeon reported at 12 feet on the pier, and it was like he was basically just like logging everything this fucking pigeon did, and I was just
I did that for a fly. I watched a fly flying around a light bulb for like hours, and I would it's okay, it's 1:00 in the morning, fly has not moved for 5 minutes. Yeah, you're looking straight up. Yeah,
all conditions normal. So how long into either a deployment or just your time in the military in general did you say, this is not for me, I need to get the fuck out? Was it like as early as the first deployment? Did it take a while? When was your
it was when I became an NCO and I wasn't allowed to be a leader. Right? Because even as an NCO, even though you're in charge of people, you can't do what you should be doing to lead them, right? There's always somebody above you and above them.
The military does a great job of making you work towards that next thing, because at that point you would have achieved something, and then you realize that you're once again back on the bottom, and you can't actually. You're like a hamster. It's like all I've done is I've gone to a bigger wheel.
I loved.
It's still a wheel.
Getting soldiers to develop and become a better version of themselves, the best version of themselves. I would encourage them to go to college. I would encourage them to think about retirement. If they were thinking about separating, okay, what kind of job skills, blah, 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 blah. But as I was doing that and as I was pushing that envelope, there's always somebody that's like, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Hey, you can't do that. Hey, you can't do that. And it's like, okay, well, if I lead the way that you lead, everything's going to suck. Everyone's going to leave anyway.
That's my biggest thing is there comes, and I think we talked about this together on your podcast when I was on it, is the idea of tradition or well, it's it's been like this, so it has to be like this. It's like we could just change it. You don't have to lead this way. There are other ways to do things that will, one, keep good soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen in the military. It's because I never joined to do 20, but while I was in, I was like, I could do 20 years of this. And then it's halfway through, it's and
you see so many, E6, E7 types that you could tell started like we did, and they were gung-ho to be a good leader, and were just completely destroyed by the system that was put in front of them. Yep.
Yeah. They're dead. They're on their second or third marriage. Their kids don't fucking like them anymore. They're just miserable in their lives every day because it's like you said, they had these ambitions or these dreams of, being the change. And it's maybe at most you affect change on a divisional level, which is such a small part of anything else. But then when the people you affected move on and then they realize that they can't really change anything, it's if you do make change in the military, it's on such a small scale.
And at that point, that's when you realize, all right,
picture.
I'm going to do what I can for now to the best of my ability, but I'm not going to stick around. I can't make the change. I can't make the impact that I was hoping to make.
Yeah. And
it has nothing to do with the people you work with. It has nothing. It's literally the system. and is this bureaucratic machine that just churns out soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen, and it just keeps churning people in and out, and you're either going to get with the program and you're going to do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be substandard because you're not allowed to be, right, pushing that boundary to be better, or you're going to get out. That's what's going to happen.
And the transition out, as we kind of talked at the beginning of the episode, it's not friendly for the person leaving, right? It's like they spend months at a time to acclimate you to the military, and then when it's time to get out, they're like, all right,
I think
hopefully you don't live on the street.
I think people get aggressive in that nature when you're getting out is because, number one, a lot of them wish that they made that choice, first and foremost. And number two, a lot of the people who have
they're jealous.
The mental capacity to be like, okay, this isn't for me, let me get out, generally speaking, are going to make something of it. And that means that the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, they're losing good people. And it's really hard for those leaders to admit that I'm going to lose good people no matter what I do.
Yeah. We need people like you to stay in.
Exactly,
and then when you say that you're going to get out, they're like, fuck you. And I'm like, you're right. You do need people like me to stay in. But I'm not, because if I stay in, I will become like you, and you're not a good person.
I hate to put that in like that specific context, but there are definitely shitbags that treat people like terribly. But a lot of those leaders are just put in a position where their hands are tied.
Sure.
You're not going to do anything to change anything at all. So you either go with the flow or you get the hell out.
I agree. Now, when you finally do get out, as you said, it took you a while to get the job, but now you're working, you're doing your podcast. So tell a little bit about your podcast. I was recently a guest on your podcast. You kind of cover like a wider range of topics.
Yes.
You know, the one you recommended to me was like the float tanks, and I was super fascinated. I went and listened to that episode. I love that episode, and I need to find like the nearest place I can do a float tank in like South Jersey. But it's like, you know, when you got into this podcast game, did you just went into it knowing like I want to talk to so many different types of people about everything?
So it's called
that
Caleb
was your
versus
goal
Self.
off the bat.
And the initial idea, to be honest with you, was, can I find people who don't think like me, who don't do the things that I do, and challenge me as a person to really understand like what they're all about and what's going on, for lack of a better word. I like the idea of consistently challenging my own narrative, and unfortunately it looks like my camera just died. My bad, man. So that whole like concept, or that idea of hopefully talking to people that I would never talk to in my life and getting some nugget of wisdom or knowledge out of them, maybe a way that they live their life, maybe a code or a book of ethics, if you will, that they live their life by. But ultimately what it's turned into is me finding just really unique and cool people, and just having, you know, as much conversation as I can with them. I've talked to an author in Japan. I've talked to the float tank guy. I just talked to a guy who lives in Alaska who does like the whole hunting, fishing, you know, living that type of life. I just talked to an RC drone dude, like just all sorts of different people that I would never talk to, and I would never, kind of like in the military, right? Your homeboys from the Army or from the Navy or from the Marines or wherever you're from. Yeah. You know for a fact that you would not have been friends with them if it wasn't for the Army or whatever your service is.
No, not a chance. Not a chance. But then they become like your best friends.
For me, like I came across your podcast, and obviously this is a lot more specific and special and unique to me because of my prior service and because of your prior service. And anytime I get a chance to talk to, you know, service members, it's definitely a different connection and experience.
And that was kind of my, you know, my premise when I did it too, is exactly like you said. You end up talking to people that you would never normally talk to, but you have that one thing in common. So it's just like for this, you know, I have the one thing in common with people. We were both in the military. It's like, okay, well, that's a starting off point. And then, you know, we end up having a good conversation about whatever, and we can relate on other stuff. I feel like yours is way more ambitious than mine, because you're just like, fuck it, let's just talk to these people. I mean, like, you're a braver person than me, because I just can't fucking do it.
it's not in everybody's wheelhouse to just go out and do that. And to be fair to you, like when you reach out to another veteran, being a veteran yourself, it's a lot easier to get that person to get on a podcast. Yeah,
very
for
much
sure.
so. Yeah,
for me,
and even
the
then,
net that I'm
sometimes it's still
casting is
difficult.
so wide that like for every like 20 people I ask, I get maybe one response, and then I got to kind of convince them that this is worth it. But it's been a lot of fun to do. It's been eye-opening in a lot of ways. I think we all set ourselves in this very specific world.
Yeah.
This is the view that I have of people in the world. And especially being a veteran, like you've got a very particular, you think civilians don't know what the hell they're talking about. You get frustrated when people want to talk about stupid shit at work. There's a very specific thing that people like you and I have of this viewpoint of the world and how we operate. When you get a chance to talk to different people and new people, it kind of opens up that periphery vision that maybe we didn't have originally. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That's cool.
It's a good point. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And what do you think, your goals going forward as far as like the podcast goes? Do you have ambitions to be like the next, like Joe Rogan, biggest thing on Spotify? Do you just do it because, you're having a good time doing it? Like, what are your goals going forward?
I do it because it's interesting for me. I've got episodes that I haven't uploaded and I probably never will upload because they're more for me. They're special to me. And I come from that very particular perspective. I don't think it'll ever, do anything other than what it's doing right now. There's a handful of people out there that are nice to me and they download it and they never listen to it. You know what I mean? I have fun doing it. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And that's kind of the same thing for me. Like, I have a blast doing these and putting them out. And, the couple people that I know that actually, talk to me that they listen to it, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I had somebody like, oh, you made like merch, and I was like, yeah, I made merch because I just wanted to have a t-shirt. It's like I just always like, just from being a kid and going to shows, like listening to bands, I was like, I always wanted my own merch site, so I made my own fucking merch site. If nobody buys it, I don't care. I have a t-shirt and I have a hat that I wear, and I was like, that makes me feel good, and talking to other people makes me feel good, which is the whole fucking reason why I did it in the first place. So it's like I have so much more fun talking to people regardless of how many people download it versus the person who's doing a podcast and they're like, I need to get more views and more whatever
work.
on it.
And
it's
I
like,
have
that's
enough
not
of that.
fun. That's a job. Yeah, I was like, I already work 40 hours a week. I don't do this to work. I do this because I enjoyed to do it, which is why I only talk to the people that I want to talk to. And if there's somebody that wants to come on the show, but they're kind of a douche, then they just don't come on the show.
As COVID hopefully starts going away and the pandemic dies down, when we all get chances to start traveling, like if I find myself in Jersey, I can hit you up and be like, yo, you want to grab a beer or something? Or you want to grab a cup of coffee and meet up?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to do like in-person podcasts. Like I know I started this during the COVID era, but it would be cool for shit to open back up. And it's like, oh, I get to talk to this person again in person, or I get to talk to this person for the first time.
Yeah, I mean,
you
again,
do a podcast on remote like that.
Making
that's
these
fun.
Connections across, all these different boundaries using the internet obviously is really cool. But there's something different about hanging out with a homie in person and just shooting the breeze and being there in person. I mean, my camera died, which doesn't help this at all. You know what I mean? But doing it in person, to your point, would be that next step, that next level of being able to connect with people on that type of level. And I think that when you do it that way, I think what you and I will find, because I have a similar goal just to be able to do that in person, I think what you'll find is that these conversations are going to go so much longer than you realize because you get lost in it.
Yeah. Which is why Joe Rogan's podcasts go like 4 hours sometimes. You're like, how the fuck does he talk for 4 hours? And then you realize, when you just hang out with your buddies, like, well, you guys are hanging out on the couch for 6 hours talking about nothing at all.
I think, and just one last thing, I know we're kind of coming to a close here, but your idea there of that watch conversation, when you get to do one of these in person, okay, I think that you should consider doing like a 6 or 7 hour thing where you guys are just bunkered down. And maybe it's me. I don't know. Maybe I come down to Jersey and I get to meet you finally. But we bunker down for like 6 or 7 hours. and the only part that anyone will get to hear is the last like hour. That's when you're going to get that conversation.
That's not a bad idea, and I have really contemplated that so many times. Like, if people could have heard the conversations that, like, me personally I've had on standing watches, they would either be
I think it would be
completely
both,
fascinated
and I
or
think
absolutely
that
fucking
there
disgusted
are
with me.
psychologists out there that would want to listen to that audio and dissect what was happening mentally to you.
Yeah, I think if I told my therapist about some of the things that I've talked about, she'd probably drop me as a patient. So, in looking back on your time in the Army, what do you think is like the biggest takeaway that you have about it? Like, what's your biggest positive that you kind of still keep with you, and maybe what's like the negative that you look back on? And it doesn't even need to necessarily be like, these are like life lessons that I've learned. It could just be something simple as like, I'll never fucking forget the smell. That's my negative. And then my positive is like, whatever.
I run a podcast
like, but what's your positive
called
negative?
Caleb versus Self, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be a little more in depth. But I would say the positive that I took away is the importance of having a group of people around you at all times. And when I say that, I mean people who actively support you, who actively challenge you, who actively push your boundaries to a degree that makes you a better person and a better human being. That's something that I think a lot of us, when we get out, we completely lose that. You know, it's not like when you get out, your wife or your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever is going to be that for you. Like, that's gone now. And when you get out, you really have to put in a lot of effort to find those people who will continue to do that for you. I think one of the principal things that veterans, especially ones who suffer from PTSD, fail to realize is that it's so important to be around people more often than not, because those same people are the ones that can help push you and help guide you in that path, especially ones who are experiencing what you're experiencing. So I think the positive from that is, with the podcast and with everything else, continuing to push those boundaries and meet new people and learn new things as much as possible is something I took from that. As far as the negative, the human condition, like, you realize that people suck.
Yeah, I've met the best people in the world and the worst people in the world in the Navy. It's just like, I mean, and it's one of those things where I get so conflicted with, where it's like, I want to support veterans, like, as a blanket statement, like, I obviously support vets and people like myself. But on that same token, it's like, I also know vets who, like, if, like, this is kind of shitty to say, but it's like, if they died tomorrow,
that's
I'd be
not
like,
exclusive to the veteran community, but I think what you learn being a veteran and spending that much time with people, whether it's in a boat or in a Humvee or wherever it is that you are, you learn at more of a depth how crappy people can be as well, how backstabbing some people can be, and how rough it can be. And that's unfortunately just part of being a human, I can't sit here and honestly say that I was a perfect soldier or a perfect human being, you know? And when you identify that, you realize that you can do something to fix it. Unfortunately, you can't do that for everybody. There's always a shitty soldier, there's always a shitty sailor, and there's always a shitty person.
And there's always a shitty podcast that we can both be guests on, and that's how we bring it full circle. So, all right, guys, thanks for listening to the episode today. I had a blast talking to you, man.
I appreciate you letting me come on and
talk
spending
again
so
in the
much
future.
time with me and let me shoot the breeze with you.
Yeah. Of course, man. It was a blast, and I'll talk to everybody next time.